Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, November 11th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Maryland game is 3 days away, and the game against Michigan is in 31 days. Those two games look a lot different than they did just a couple weeks ago. You remember the long gone days of late October. Michigan was coming off a decisive win over what we all thought was a pretty impressive Minnesota team. Maryland had just gotten blown out by what was supposed to just be a just okay Northwestern squad. And now the Terps are in third place in the Big Ten East, just behind Ohio State and Indiana. Michigan and Penn State are at the bottom of the standings at a combined 1-5. We'll be talking to one of the beat writers from the Washington Times on tomorrow's show to figure out why things are suddenly going so well for Maryland. But today, we're going to take a look at the opposite end of the standings and at what the heck is happening in State College in Ann Arbor. My guest today is Tony Gerdeman. He writes the Michigan Monday column at Buckeye Scoop. Tony, you've been writing that column for close to 15 years now. When was the last time things looked this bad for the Wolverines?
I would say probably 2008, Rich Rod's first year when they're losing to Toledo. And I still go back to Tom Amstutz, the Toledo head coach that year, beats Michigan, gets fired at the end of the year. To tell you how little a win over Michigan meant for Toledo that year. Brady Hoke at the end was bad, but I've never seen anything like what Michigan did back in 2008 in Rich Rod's first year. But what Jim Harbaugh did last week was something that Brady Hoke never did and Rich Rod never did, and that's lose to Indiana. And as I wrote in Michigan Monday, this wasn't rock bottom. Rock bottom was the week before losing to Michigan State. You can't lose that game, especially after seeing Michigan State come out and be terrible once again this week. How that happened, we don't know, but it's a product of Jim Harbaugh, and he said they all need to own it. That's his forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say that everyone needs to own it when you're the one cashing the biggest check in the building. There's not much question whose shoulders that falls on. The weird thing, though, to me is like in the midst of all the gloom and doom up in Ann Arbor right now, you look and it's like, oh, they might have a quarterback. Like Joe Milton isn't there yet, but it's like you can squint and see it. You can he's coming along. The arm strength is there. Like if he can figure out the touch, if he can figure out some of the accuracy, I mean, like they may have something that, a year from now, 2 years from now, Ohio State fans are going, oh, Michigan's got a quarterback all of a sudden. What have you seen out of him? Like explain like what you've seen out of him and the growth you've seen out of him the first couple weeks of the year.
Yeah, the growth that I've seen is he's taking, or maybe he's being allowed to throw the ball down the field more. I've been charting his completions and incompletions all season long. In the first game, his completions traveled an average of 4 yards down the field. Second game, his completions traveled an average of 5.6 yards down the field. And then this past week, it was up to 12.3 yards, I believe. So let you know, and he completed one pass. It was a 37-yard touchdown, but technically it was like 44 yards from the line of scrimmage into the 7 yards deep in the end zone. And I believe that's been his only completion of 30 yards or more, like in the air, 30 yards or more this season. He's 1 of 10 on those throws, but he is improving a little bit in the 20-yard range. But I think he's definitely getting more confident. But also by throwing down the field more, he threw his first 2 interceptions of the season. And I think that's what we are going to see. And maybe what they're trying to protect early on is let's just not go crazy by throwing the ball down the field. But then as they see how difficult it is to get the ball down the field with the running game and by these short throws, they've decided, okay, the receivers are, a couple games better. We can start maybe taking some more shots down the field. He has to be smart with the shots, and as you said, definitely get more accurate and put more touch. He had some open guys and overthrew Ronnie Bell on one that would have been a sure touchdown. And, redshirt sophomore, third start, there is a bright future, except my concern is my theory that I've had for a while now. The longer a quarterback in Michigan plays under Jim Harbaugh, the worse they get. And you go back to Wilton Speight and Shea Patterson and John O'Korn and the guy at Illinois right now, it's Brandon Peters. If the reason his best quarterback was Jake Rudock, who spent a training camp with Jim Harbaugh and then a season, and then he was gone. And I don't think anybody has played as well as he has yet.
Yeah, and I mean, the Milton had those two picks, as you mentioned. One of them was like, yeah, okay, that wasn't a terrible throw. The other one was like, oh man, I don't know who you were throwing to, but that defensive back was wide open. And things are not so great in other areas on the offense for them. I mean, at Indiana, the Wolverines are missing both of their starting tackles. That obviously hurts in the run game and pass pro. The wide receivers were like okay, but they're not fantastic. The running backs, you don't know exactly how much to chalk up to the running backs not being quite as good as we thought versus the offensive line issues. But it doesn't look like the line's not there yet, and overall, it looks like the skill talent isn't quite where it needs to be, kind of across the board there.
Yeah, and I think the receivers they're starting to the best are starting to rise, like Ronnie Bell, and we've seen more from Cornelius Johnson, an outside guy, and then the freshman out of Hawaii, Roman Wilson. I think those three are their best three, and they need to play those guys more and maybe slow down with all of the rotation that they do. They put so many guys out there, and there's really the lack of return on that playing time is it's bad. Like Mike Sainris still and Giles Jackson and one other guy, they played like 52 snaps and produced one catch for 6 yards in the fourth quarter. And that's not enough. They need to stick with some guys and just go there. Like even Ohio State, as deep as they are, I think Chris Olave played all but like 15 snaps against Rutgers this past week because of just, that's what they want out of it right now. And it's working. And as you said, the running backs, they had apparently a pretty good offensive line last year. I still don't buy it. They had 4 NFL guys there and a fifth once Jalen Mayfield leaves. But, maybe the running backs just are not very good. And I don't know that they're certainly not dynamic. They do have their issues. But when Hassan Haskins is their best running back, in my opinion. He doesn't get his first carry until the second quarter, gets 3 on one drive, gets 2 on the next drive, and doesn't see the ball again except for one other time. 6 carries. Zach Charbonnet, I think, maybe had 1 carry. Just the continued splitting of carries between 4 guys is not working. And really, I think they just need to condense it. You know how we have issues with Greg Schiano being too complicated? I'm not saying Michigan's offense is too complicated. I'm just saying there's maybe too many ingredients right now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe an update of the old, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Like if you have 4 running backs, you have maybe no running backs at all. You can do 2. You've seen Ohio State do 2. And even then, with the Mike Weber, J.K. Dobbins year, even then it was like, yeah, they didn't quite love doing that. They didn't really love rotating carries and rotating drives. And you saw guys, maybe pressing too much. So you can only imagine how much guys are pressing if they're splitting carries 4 ways. On defense, I think that there's a problem that I think we all kind of saw coming, which was the middle of the defensive line, the defensive tackles. Just it's not quite as bad as it was last year, but it's still not very good. And then, I mean, maybe the bigger problem is the defensive backfield. Like, my goodness, they have Daxton Hill, and the biggest problem they have with Daxton Hill is that they do not have 5 Daxton Hills. So you've got, Vincent Gray, Jamon Green. You got a bunch of guys who have gotten burned the last couple weeks, have gotten grabby because they've gotten burned, and you can tell they're just getting a little gun shy. And, between not having a good middle of your defensive line and not having defensive backs that believe in themselves or that the coaches probably believe in, that can turn you into a tire fire on defense pretty quick.
Yeah, and cornerbacks are supposed to forget each play. Man, I don't know how Vincent Gray can forget all of the plays that he has been giving up. And, he was benched against Michigan State, was back in the starting lineup this past week, and they went right after him again. And they went each week, guys, the last 2 weeks. Ricky White comes out of nowhere, has a career day. Ty Freifogel this past week against Michigan has a career high in catches and yards. And we talked before the game, well, it'll just be Whop Philyor going crazy. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what kind of outside receivers Indiana has. I don't know that maybe it won't be such a matchup nightmare. But if you have outside receivers, it is a matchup nightmare for Michigan. if you can get some off of the street, it is apparently a nightmare for these Wolverines. And yeah, there's the lack of confidence, the fact that they know they're going to be attacked, and so they're almost like grabbing immediately. But this also isn't something new in terms of the grabbing. Jordan Lewis used to do it all the time at Michigan, and when I would point it out, that's just part of the game. Well, I guess it's part of the game if you're good enough to get away with it. It's a penalty if you're not. And right now, Michigan's corners, I still don't know what they're going to do, because you can't move Daxton Hill from what he is as a safety / nickel corner. Like, you could move him outside. I don't know. Maybe you put him on the best receiver, but then, like I said, you don't need a dynamic receiver outside to take advantage of either Vincent Gray or Jamon Green or whoever they then bring in after one of those two guys has been pulled.
Yeah, I don't know what the answers are this year for Michigan, especially in the defensive backfield. I mean, other than maybe these guys miraculously get better or they get more comfortable playing in zone, because, press man does not seem like a viable option. So they're going to have to, and they went to some zone the last couple of weeks, and it's like they don't look comfortable playing zone, and so then they don't play well in zone. It's like, well, that's not an option as well. So, maybe that gets better as the year goes on. I'm going to ask you the same question you asked me on Buckeye Weekly in the episode we dropped on Tuesday. Who is the head coach of Michigan for their 2021 season opener? Because Jim Harbaugh's contract is up after 2021, and nothing that has happened so far this year has made it likely he's going to get his contract bumped up. So who's coaching them the season opener next year?
Well, I was thinking, Mario Cristobal, and that's what I told you. And then you told me, no, that's stupid. And I was like, yeah, you're right, after listening to you. I think Matt Campbell is maybe the odds-on favorite bet, the easiest bet. But I'm almost all in on this Jeff Hafley thing, even though 1 year at BC of, like, who knows, 5-5 this year, that's not going to be enough. So I think at this point it cannot be Jim Harbaugh. I think if you do that, then you're just resigning yourself to, this is the last year of Jim Harbaugh, and then we'll do something. And who knows, maybe that's what they're doing. But it's not going to be Luke Fickell. So I guess I will have to agree with you and say Matt Campbell, but I still think he's going to be holding out for Texas, which may very well be open. So then, Tom, how about Tom Herman?
I'm not sure Tom Herman is going to do real well, since he's coaching at a place that has a lot of the same advantages as Michigan right now and not really succeeding. And also doing it in a state where his home recruiting base, he's the flagship university of the state with maybe the best high school football talent in the entire nation. If he can't win there, I'm not sure being the flagship university in the state that has the, 19th best high school talent in the nation, I'm not sure that's going to be a winning formula. I do think the Hafley idea is interesting. He's, it's a real high risk, high reward thing where that program needs energy more than anything else, and like an energetic recruiter who, is personable. I mean, they always talk about hiring the opposite of the last guy. So you went from, Bo Pelini as angry F-bombs to, sweet, nice, personable Mike Riley at Nebraska. Maybe this is the opposite of Harbaugh, because everyone who has an interaction with Jim Harbaugh comes away going, that guy's kind of weird and a little awkward, and he is real low energy right now. You think back to the first couple of years, and it's like you look at the first couple of years to now, and it's like, what happened to that guy? Hafley is the exact opposite. Hafley is one of the most immediately likable people on earth. Like, I don't know anyone around the Ohio State program who did not just absolutely love Jeff Hafley. Like, we would do a little fist pump in the media room when Jerry Amick would go, "Oh, we're Jeff Hafley's next." It's like, yes, all right, we get to talk to Jeff Hafley. Just a nice, interesting guy who is like a real no nonsense guy. Honestly, I think the ceiling with a Jeff Hafley there, the floor is lower because you don't know. There's not much track record. The ceiling is pretty high for Hafley. If it works, it really, really works there. So Penn State, though, that's an entirely different mess. They had some personnel questions entering the year. sort of like Michigan did, but James Franklin's job security, totally fine. James Franklin not going anywhere. There might have been rumors that James Franklin was going to Southern Cal or Texas or something after the season. Nope, James Franklin's not going anywhere. They are 0-3, and they just got absolutely annihilated at home by Maryland. It ended up 35-19. It was 35-7 Maryland going into the fourth quarter. 35-7 at Penn State. There's the theory that they got beat twice by Ohio State, like a hangover game kind of thing. But, I mean, after watching that game, I went back and watched it today. There are big, big problems at quarterback for Penn State. Sean Clifford was 6 for 21 in the first half. He took a terrible sack. They had a 3rd and 15. I think it was 35-7 at that point in the second half. He took a terrible sack on 3rd and 15, turned it into 4th and 31, and then they had to kick a 48 or 50-yard field goal and missed that. I mean, he just looks like he's regressing at this point.
Yeah, like 57 attempts to put up 340 yards. It's been interesting because I don't know that anybody really thought much of him coming into last year, but I think most people were pleasantly surprised by what he did. And you're thinking, well, if you can build on that, no, he's not Trace McSorley, but you could, with Penn State's talent and defense and running game, if you're just good, then that's good enough. And what you can't be is bad. And we've seen just weird, odd throws for now a guy in his second year of starting who has played a lot of football. And it's hard to have a lot of faith in him and just expect him to make plays. At this point, his running is there, but he's not going to scare you. You have to be aware of it. And really, what does he do? If you're a defense, what does he do that concerns you? Because if you can get to him, you can affect him. And if you do it regularly, then later on it's going to affect him as well. And without the running game, I would agree. There does seem to be a regression there in the fact that he still looks like a first-year starter.
Yeah, one of the things that's probably not helping him is the receiving core. He was holding the ball a long time in the pocket, and that was a function of guys just not getting open. And, we'll talk about Maryland more tomorrow, but, their defensive backfield is not fantastic. You don't think they're going to have any Thorpe Award finalists or first-round draft picks in that defensive backfield, and it was just like guys weren't getting open. Ohio State fans obviously know Jahan Dotson. They remember him from about a week ago. He had a nice touchdown catch. Pat Fryermuth had a couple plays at tight end. He's a good receiver. Freshman wide receiver Parker Washington had a couple touchdowns kind of later in the loss. He had a couple fourth quarter touchdowns. But, I mean, just overall, with the couple running backs being out, Journey Brown being out, Noah Cain being out for the season, and just not a ton of depth in that wide receiver unit, there's not a lot of skill talent on that team right now.
Oh, and Maryland is more talented in skill than Penn State is right now. Who are you going to take? Talia Tagovailoa or Sean Clifford? I mean, there's no contest there. Even Jake Funk at Maryland or any running back you want to consider who's still playing for Penn State. Receivers as well. Maryland is deeper at receiver. And then you look at Penn State's recruiting classes. 2018 was a number 6 class in the nation. 2019 is 12. 2020, 15. Right now, 2021 is the 31st ranked class in the nation. And that's with 14 guys already. So it's not like it's lowly ranked because they don't have a lot of guys. And then you go back to that 2018 class. That was a class with Micah Parsons, who is no longer there. It was a class with Justin Shorter, 5-star number 1 receiver in the nation, didn't pan out and transferred. And that was also Ricky Slade, running back, 5-star running back who ended up transferring. So those are big wins and a lot of time spent in recruiting that don't pan out, and other guys go other places and do. And it's been like a kind of a waste of resources, but they still get pretty decent recruits that they should be able to do something with. And, there's been coaching turnover on the offensive side. We know that, losing offensive coordinators, even losing Josh Gaddis a few years ago, and Joe Moorhead, more recently than that. And I mean, it's hard to keep everybody together. It's hard to then develop players with different coaches coming in and out. But it's kind of like Michigan. They need to do a better job of developing, especially if the recruiting is going to be in the 12 to 20 range every year.
Yeah, I mean, the 12 to 20 range is going to get you probably, I mean, 12 to 20 range gets you about to 9 wins and the Citrus Bowl or something like that. That's not, you're not going to consistently compete with or beat Ohio State with that range. You should also not be losing to Maryland. Like, you should not be losing to Maryland with a team that's in anywhere in that range. I have not looked up the 24/7 like talent composite, basically for the roster talent composite. I would be willing to bet they are probably 25 to 30 spots higher than Maryland on that. And then to, be down 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter at home, like, no, that does not compute at all. And they do have stuff. I mean, this is, let's put the 2020 caveat on this. They do have stuff going on within that program that is specific to 2020. James Franklin, for example, his daughter has sickle cell. So she's more at risk for COVID-19. So they've been out of state and have been for a long time. And, if you haven't seen your family for, however many months, 7 months at this point or whatever it is in person, I mean, there are a lot of people going through that. I mean, Ryan Day is not staying at home and all that stuff right now for, the same basic reason. But, it sounds like that's really starting to wear on James Franklin at this point.
Yeah, it was interesting just reading about it on Tuesday where, every day when they do these Zoom meetings with the media and James Franklin, he asks them how they're doing or they ask him how he's doing. And it was on Tuesday, I believe he's like, well, I'm not doing so great. And then he talked to them about missing his family and trying to just keep all this in, all of the feelings that are going on, because he doesn't want to unload it on his wife because she's also dealing with having the daughters just with herself away from her husband. And then finally they had a kind of a talk about it all. And so there's so much of this going on. And you kind of go back to the Ryan Day thing, which is you just have to handle it better than the other guys. And I guess that's easy to say, but really the ones who do handle it better will be the ones who are then better off. I don't want to say better off in terms of the record. They'll be better off down the road. But that's what Ryan Day has been saying all along. And the rest of the Ohio State coaches and other coaches, how we come through this will determine how we do this season. And whoever handles it the best will be there at the end. And I would be shocked to find out that James Franklin is the only one not doing well with this whole thing at Penn State.
Well, I mean, that goes back to something a conversation you and I have had a couple times on Buckeye Weekly, which is at what point do the teams who are kind of done kind of check out on the season? And then, and then you have a COVID outbreak because your team is 0-3 or 0-4 or 1-4. And like, all right, we're tired of all this stuff. Because, Ohio State's talked about the incredible lengths they have to go to keep guys safe and stay kind of quasi bubbled and all of that. And that's worth it if you're playing for a national championship. And that may be worth it if you're playing, if you're in Indiana, where even if you're not playing for a national championship, hey, maybe Indiana makes a New Year's Six bowl game or something like that this year. You have a chance to really make some history. It's worth it for them. If you're Illinois and it's a matter of, are we going to go 1-7 or 0-8? Like, does it really matter that much? And are guys really going to be willing to stick it there? And, maybe they are, but, there are 14 programs in the Big Ten. And I'm going to guess that at least a couple of them will probably have some issues like that. I mean, that is the old Urban Meyer E plus R equals O, event plus response equals outcome. And, the event is the same for everyone, as Ryan Day has said. And now it's up to them to figure out what the response is. And that's what's going to determine the outcome.
I wonder, Tom, where would you put the likelihood that Ohio State and Michigan play this year? You're talking about teams that they just shut it down and then something happens. 85%, 90%? Are you going to go 95% that game happens? Or are you below 95%? If I set the over under at 95%, are you going over or under that?
I would say about 95%. I think there's been a bunch of stuff in the SEC this week, like 3 or 4 maybe games have been canceled in the SEC. And, there's certain stuff that is just going to be outside of your control. And so, Wisconsin just missed a couple weeks and it sounds like it was just one guy who had one false negative test and that was it. So, yeah, it's definitely not a sure thing that anything is going to happen at this point. The only thing that is guaranteed is what has already happened. So, it's I would say 95% might be a little high, but somewhere in the 90 to 95% range is probably about right. I think it's far, far, far more likely that it'll happen. And, I think that one of the things that makes me think that is I think there's a very, 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 very low chance that there is an issue with Ohio State at this point, just because of the focus of the team that we talked about. And, it's just, you can't let your guard down for a minute. And I think there's a pretty good chance that Ohio State players have had it drummed into their heads enough that you can't let your guard down for a minute. But, you don't know. You're playing a whole bunch of other teams, and maybe they're not all as motivated as you are. So on that uplifting note, that'll do it for today's show. Thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate that. And so that I'm sure you probably enjoyed the little dose of Schadenfreude from the bottom half of the Big Ten East standings right now. So we will tomorrow we'll be talking about one of the teams in the top half of the Big Ten East standings, the Maryland Terrapins, who the Buckeyes will be playing on Saturday in College Park. So you can look forward to that. Also, make sure you check out all of our great podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. We've got a ton of great shows. Alex Gleitman should have a new Around the Oval podcast coming out later today. Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green will have a Gives in the Bank podcast, as well as a Vegas Knows podcast coming out later in the week. There is a ton of great content. It is all free and all for you on those podcast platforms. Also, make sure you check out BuckeyeScoop.com. We've had a ton of great content there. Nevada Buck just had a really interesting insider report from some of the grades for guys for the Rutgers game. It is information you really don't get unless you have like real insider access. That was a super, super interesting report on our Ask the Insiders board yesterday. Alex Gleitman just wrote about 10 guys from the 2021 class who are the most likely to make an immediate impact in the field. That was a really good piece. Mick Walker has had a couple scouting reports on top 2021 players he's seen in person recently, and much, much more. That is all at BuckeyeScoop.com. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.